Good evening. How are you? I hope everyone is still in the game. I suggest you drink a glass of water, stretch your body, and stay still because we are yet to uncover and explore more on the field of linguistics. I am Mr. Steve Trosio Corsino, and welcome to my class. Our focus this evening is on translanguaging in multilingual English classrooms. But before that, let me present to you the outline and the overview of the entire discussion. First, we will know the proponent of this book as far as the discussion of translanguaging is concerned, who is Angel M. Lin. Next, we will revisit the historical origins of the term translanguaging. And later on, we will study on translanguaging as a theory of language, and we will also differentiate what makes translanguaging and code switching different from each other. We all know that there are some issues and concern with regards to the similarities and to the differences between these two concepts, translanguaging and code switching, because they believe that translanguaging is just the new version of this code switching. But later on, I will prove to you and I will tell you what makes them different from each other. And also later on, we will discuss about translanguaging pedagogies. Specifically, we will differentiate spontaneous translanguaging pedagogies and planned translanguaging pedagogies. And before I will end my discussion, we will have a very short summary about the discussions that we have had a while ago. Now, we will focus on know further who is Angel M. Lin, who is the author of our discussion tonight. So, Angel M. Lin is a professor of English language and literacy education at the Simon Fraser University, Canada. She received her PhD in 1996 from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, Canada. She has led a productive teaching and research career in the areas of classroom discourse analysis, sociocultural theories of language education, bilingual and plurilingual education, academic literacies, youth cultural and media studies, critical discourse analysis, and language in education policy and practice in post-colonial contexts. Furthermore, Angel M. Lin works on developing interdisciplinary approaches to second, foreign, additional language education through drawing on cultural studies, new literacy studies, and language and identity research. Her current research interests include translanguaging, which is our main focus tonight, and transsemitizing, languages, cultures, and literacies across the curriculum, content and language integrated learning or CLIL, languages and literacies in science and mathematics education, and social semiotics in plurilingual education contexts. We're done knowing the proponent of this book, who is Angel M. Lin. Now, we will revisit the historical origins of the term translanguaging. Where does the word translanguaging come from? Originally, translanguaging was coined and developed for bilingual minoritized speaker. Example, William Baker in 2001, and other Welsh scholars. We have Lewis Jones and Baker in 2012, Chris Buckledge in 2010, Garcia in 2009, Garcia and Liu in 2014, and Garcia and Red in 2015. So the term translanguaging was first coined by Sen Williams in 1994 as the ability of multilingual speakers to shuttle between languages, treating the diverse languages that form the repertoire as an integrated system. So the word translanguaging was used to refer to a pedagogical practice in Welsh or English bilingual education classrooms where students are asked to alternate languages for the purpose of receptive or productive use. For instance, the Welsh or English bilingual teacher can intentionally use both English and Welsh as the languages of input. Example, allowing students to read diverse sources of readings on a topic, including the student's familiar language English, while maintaining Welsh, so the target language, as the language of output. Example, requiring students to write up a summary on the topic in Welsh. So this practice is seen as having pedagogical functions of using what is more familiar to the students, which is English, to help them learn what is less familiar, which is Welsh. So we will focus now on translanguaging as a theory of language. So what is translanguaging? Colin Baker, one of the most influential scholars in the field of bilingual education, explained the pedagogical functions that translanguaging can have: to read and discuss a topic in one language and then to write it in another language means that the subject matter has to be processed and digested. So the use of students' full linguistic repertoire to make meaning without thinking that they have one languages that is different from one another. So this is taken from the talk of Professor Dr. Ophelia Garcia on the subject translanguaging. So in other words, when we speak about translanguaging, this refers to using one language to reinforce the order to increase the learner's understanding of and ability to use both language. So according to Baker in 2011, there are several pedagogical functions of translanguaging. First, it may promote a deeper and fuller understanding of the subject matter. Second, it may help the development of the weaker language. Still, this is according to the study of Baker in 2011. Third, pedagogical functions of translanguaging is it may facilitate homeschool links and cooperation. And lastly, one of the pedagogical functions of translanguaging is it may help the integration of fluent speakers with early learners. So in other words, when we speak about translanguaging, this is the dynamic process whereby multilingual language users mediate complex social and cognitive activities through strategic employment of multiple semiotic resources to act, to know, and to be. That this is still in according to Garcia and Lewy in 2014. So a 5-year research project in Wales has found that translanguaging was used as the only or dominant approach in approximately 1/3 of the 100 lessons observed. This is cited by Lewis et al. In 2012. It was found pedagogically effective examples of translanguaging in Welsh classrooms in senior primary education in the arts and humanities subject. The researchers concluded that in translanguaging, both languages are used in a dynamic and functionally integrated manner to organize and mediate mental processes in understanding, speaking, literacy, and not least learning. So now, we will focus on the difference between translanguaging and code switching. Are they the same? Are they different? So let us find out. So when we say code switching, it refers to the alternating use of more than one linguistic code. So this term that has been used in social linguistics to refer to the alternating use of more than one linguistic code. So both codes mixing which refers to the intraclausal centennial alternation, and code switching, which refer to the alternation of the interclausal centennial level, are usually referred to by the umbrella term code switching. So basically, code switching is the process of shifting from one linguistic code, whether a language or a dialect, to another, depending on the social context or conversational setting. So the recent literature has further supportedly increasingly dynamic views on language and human communication, seeing language not as static codes with solid boundaries, but rather as fluid resources in meaning-making practices. So this is cited in the study of Pinnicook in 2010 and et al. So the the term translanguaging might look like code mixing or code switching, but the term translanguaging does commit the researcher and educator to a much more fluid and dynamic view of language. Language are clearly social constructions with arbitrary boundaries. So example is between a language and a dialect. But these social constructions generate an immense material and symbolic reality. So example is dictionaries, school curricula, wars, profits for corporations that teach and test languages, etc. It is entirely possible to reconcile the construct of translanguaging, which highlights the integrated conceptual linguistic system through which plurilingual individuals process and use language, with the social reality of different languages understood as historical, cultural, and ideological constructs that have material consequence and determine social action. So if we're going to summarize the difference between translanguaging and code switching, we could say that translanguaging may refer to one integrated linguistic system, while on the other hand, when we say code switching, this is the assumption of separate systems. So translanguaging, both languages are used in dynamic and functionally integrated manner to organize and mediate processes in understanding, speaking literacy, and not least learning. So that was stated a while ago by Lewis Jones and Baker in 2012. Now, while code switching focuses on named languages to monolingualism. So for translanguaging from it comes from speaker's internal perspective, agency in a bilingual speaker, while code switching may refer from external societal perspective, empowering the named language. So the language practices are all interrelated, while in code switching, two or more languages, one is L1 and the other is L2. So for translanguaging, that language practice do not occupy hierarchical positions. The use of students' full linguistic repertoire to make meaning without thinking that they have one language that is different from the other. While code switching, one language is dominant status, the others is non-dominant. So this time, we will transfer and focus on translanguaging pedagogy. So there are two translanguaging pedagogies. Specifically, we have spontaneous translanguaging pedagogy and we have planned or designed translanguaging pedagogy. Let's talk about spontaneous translanguaging. So spontaneous translanguaging pedagogies take place without planning or design, as the bi-multilingual teacher spontaneously translanguages or allows students to spontaneously translanguage or both to scaffold students' learning in the ongoing dynamic interaction. So this is the more familiar type of translanguage pedagogy analyzed in the research literature. So on the other hand, when we speak about planned or designed translanguaging, this is the systematic planning on the part of the teacher and curriculum designer and requires an intimate knowledge of the student's multilingual linguistic resources. So Sina's forthcoming reported on a study in the context of the Basque country where students speaking Spanish as their familiar and the most familiar language, which is L1, need to learn the Basque language as their heritage language and English as a foreign language. So Sinas and her colleagues have developed a systematic planned translanguaging pedagogy to help students to draw out the similar linguistic features common to Spanish, the Basque language, and English. So planned or designed uh, translanguaging pedagogies require the teacher and the curriculum designers to be intimately familiar with the linguistic features of all these languages in order to develop learning materials that can scaffold students' learning of all three languages instead of confusing them. In Sina study, a translingual language arts program has been set up in participating school with the explicit purpose of linking literacies in all these three languages that the students are learning in the school curriculum, and so there is no clash of different learning agendas in the lesson. So now we are done differentiating the two translanguaging pedagogies, specifically the planned or designed translanguaging and the spontaneous translanguaging. This time we will talk about the principles of translanguaging pedagogies. So there are four principles of translanguaging pedagogies. First, it says that translanguaging is practiced by multilinguals in their natural communication, and it is norm rather than the exception. Another thing is human meaning making is first and foremost experienced as fluid, dynamic activity flows, as cited by Limke in 2016. And we draw on all our linguistic and semiotic resources when we're engaged in making sense of to one another. So this first order reality is, however, reflected upon, analyzed, and codified and refined later on, and experience a second order reality, thus our deep rooted notion of separate languages or codes. Third principle of translanguaging pedagogies is that translanguaging pedagogies can be differentiated as spontaneous or planned. However, these are best conceived as lying on a continuum rather than as strictly binary option. So the fourth principle of translanguaging is translanguaging pedagogies aim at mobilizing students' familiar resources to scaffold their mastery of the target resources, as cited by Lin in 2012. Thus, planned translanguaging pedagogies require teachers and curriculum material designers to systematically design materials that capitalize on students' strengths to support their learning. On the other hand, if teachers are using spontaneous translanguaging to scaffold learning, they need to be focused on facilitating students' understanding, activating their interests and background knowledge. This requires continuous gauging and monitoring of students' understanding and responding to students' responses and feedback. So in view of this need of continuous gauging of responding to students' current level of understanding, the kind of monologic translation practice witnessed in many traditional East Asian languages or language classrooms should not be misrecognized as translanguaging pedagogy. So if teachers are using translanguaging to scaffold learning, they need to be focused on facilitating students' understanding, activating their interests, background knowledge. So this requires continuous gauging and monitoring students and responding to students' response and feedback. So what is now the role of the educator in translanguaging? So first, teachers will serve as the detective, recognizing students' strengths, and the co-learner and builder acting as co-learner and building upon learners' linguistic competence. Next, the transformer, normalizing linguistic diversity and translanguaging practices, liberating multilingual voices, and deepening discussion and meaning making. So let me end this discussion on the insight of Lemke, which says it is not all obvious that if they were not politically prevented from doing so, languages would not mix and dissolve into one another, but we understand almost nothing of such processes. Could it be that all our current pedagogical methods, in fact, make multilingual development more difficult than it need to be, simply because we bow to dominant political and ideological pressures to keep languages pure and separate. So I hope you have learned something from our discussion today. Again, I am your reporter tonight, Mr. Steve Trosio Corsino. God bless everyone and good evening.